There's a specific moment, different for everyone, but you know the one. You're looking in the mirror, maybe just brushing your teeth, nothing special, and something catches your eye. The light is hitting your hairline at a slightly different angle than you remembered. Or maybe you find a cluster of hair on your pillow or in the shower drain, and you hold it up and you think, wait, is that a lot? Welcome to Briefly Science. And today, we're going in deep on one of the most intimate, most quietly distressing, and most scientifically bizarre things the human body does, going bald. Not because of disease, not because of stress, well, not only because of stress, but because of a hormone that also builds your muscles, drives your ambition, and shapes the sound of your voice. The same hormone that makes you is quietly dismantling your hair follicles, one at a time, for years. And here's the maddening part. It's doing it on purpose. Let's start not on your scalp, but on the savanna. 2 million years ago, our ancestors started doing something unusual in the primate family. They lost almost all their body hair. Gorillas kept theirs, chimps kept theirs, but early Homo, the ones who stood upright and started running long distances under the African midday sun, they went largely naked. This wasn't random. It was a thermal engineering solution. Running generates an enormous amount of heat, and thick fur traps that heat rather than releasing it. But we evolved an extraordinary alternative, sweating. Millions of eccrine glands, capable of dumping heat through evaporation, covering almost our entire body surface. Sweating works best on bare skin, so the fur went, and in exchange, we got endurance. We could chase prey for hours in the midday heat, long after faster animals had retreated into the shade. We became the most efficient long-distance runners on the planet. But we kept hair in one specific place, our heads. And that makes sense, actually. Your head is pointed directly at the sun when you're walking or running upright. Your scalp covers your brain, an organ that generates enormous metabolic heat and is extraordinarily sensitive to overheating. Head hair acts as insulation against UV radiation and as a buffer against direct solar heat. It's useful. Evolution kept it. So now we have an evolutionary story where keeping scalp hair was a genuine advantage, which makes the fact that many of us lose it all the more puzzling. Let's zoom in to the follicle. Each hair on your head grows from a hair follicle, a tiny self-contained biological factory embedded in your scalp. And each follicle lives on a cycle. There's a growth phase called anagen, which can last anywhere from 2 to 6 years. Then a brief transition phase called catagen. Then a resting phase called telogen, usually a few months, after which the old hair falls out and a new one begins growing in its place. On a healthy scalp, roughly 80 to 90% of your follicles are an anagen at any given moment, which is why losing 50 to 100 hairs a day is completely normal. There's a constant rotation, but also constant replacement. Under normal circumstances, this cycle runs fine for decades. The follicle grows the hair, sheds it, grows another one, the hair comes back. Your scalp stays covered. But in some people, specifically people with a particular genetic setup, something goes wrong with the cycle, not suddenly, slowly, almost imperceptibly slowly. And the culprit is a molecule called DHT. DHT stands for dihydrotestosterone. It's made from testosterone. Specifically, an enzyme called 5-alpha reductase, concentrated heavily in the scalp and the prostate, grabs regular testosterone and converts it into something significantly more potent. About 10% of all testosterone in your body gets converted this way. The result, DHT, binds to androgen receptors about 5 times more powerfully than testosterone does. It holds on longer, it hits harder, and in most tissues, DHT is useful. It drives the development of a lot of what we associate with physical maturity. Deepening of the voice, increases in muscle mass during puberty, the growth of body and facial hair. In fact, if you've ever wondered why some men have incredibly thick, dense beards, DHT. The beard follicles respond to DHT by growing larger, stronger, longer. DHT is, for facial hair, basically fertilizer. Now here's the paradox that genuinely stumped scientists for decades. That exact same molecule, DHT, does the opposite thing to scalp follicles in genetically susceptible people. It doesn't make them grow, it makes them shrink. DHT binds to androgen receptors in cells called dermal papilla cells, which sit at the base of each hair follicle and act like the follicle's control center. In susceptible scalp follicles, this binding triggers the production of a set of molecules, including one ominously named DKK1, that essentially tell the follicle, slow down, produce thinner hair, shorten your growth phase. DHT interferes with the growth signals. It suppresses the production of IGF-1, a molecule that normally promotes cell proliferation in the follicle. It activates TGF-beta, which promotes a kind of premature shutdown. The anagen phase, which normally runs for years, starts contracting. 2 years becomes 18 months. 18 months becomes 12, then 6, then 3. Each cycle, the follicle regrows slightly smaller than before. The hair produced is a little thinner, a little shorter, a little lighter. Scientists call this miniaturization. The follicle is still there. The stem cells are still there. The equipment still exists. But the output keeps diminishing, cycle by cycle, over years and decades, until eventually the follicle enters a kind of permanent dormancy, producing only a fine, colorless, barely visible vellus hair, like the fuzz on your forehead. Terminal hair to vellus, thick to thin, there to essentially gone. And here's what makes this so cruel and so strange. It only happens on the top and front of the scalp. The follicles on the back and sides of your head, even in deeply bald men, retain their resistance to DHT essentially forever. Transplant a resistant follicle from the back of the head to the crown, it stays resistant. Transplant a susceptible crown follicle to the forearm, it miniaturizes right on schedule. The vulnerability is programmed into the follicle itself. The scalp is, in a very real sense, a patchwork of 2 different biological territories with completely different responses to the same hormone. Why? We don't fully know. This is one of the genuine remaining mysteries. Now, who does this happen to? The numbers are worth sitting with for a moment. By age 35, roughly 40% of men show some degree of pattern hair loss. By age 50, it's more like 50%. By age 70, around 80% of men have experienced significant loss. Globally, this affects hundreds of millions of people. It is the most common type of hair loss by an enormous margin, making up about 95% of all cases. Women are significantly more protected. Women produce far less testosterone and therefore far less DHT. They also have estrogen and progesterone, both of which have a protective effect on hair follicles, actively opposing the miniaturization process. Women who do experience pattern hair loss tend to see diffuse thinning across the crown rather than the crisp receding hairline pattern common in men. And it typically becomes more noticeable after menopause when estrogen levels fall. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence for how central DHT is to the whole process comes from an old and somewhat grim historical observation: eunuchs. Men castrated before puberty, deprived of testosterone production, never develop male pattern baldness, ever. Even men genetically predisposed to baldness. No testosterone means no DHT means no miniaturization. Hamilton documented this in the 1940s and later confirmed it with testosterone supplementation in willing eunuch volunteers, which reliably produced the onset of hair loss within months. The experiments were stopped when the men asked for them to stop. The connection was unambiguous, so the mechanism is clear. But the evolutionary why did this persist? Why didn't natural selection eliminate baldness genes from the population? Is where it gets genuinely interesting. The most compelling explanation is called antagonistic pleiotropy. It means the same gene does multiple things in the same body, some of them beneficial and some of them costly, and the evidence for this in baldness is striking. The genetic variants associated with increased susceptibility to male pattern hair loss are often the same variants associated with higher androgen receptor sensitivity throughout the body, which means more response to testosterone in muscles, bone density, drive, aggression, reproductive biology. In short, the same genetic profile that sets you up to go bald may also have been associated with being physically stronger, more dominant, more reproductively successful, in the environment where those things really mattered. Baldness in this framing isn't a malfunction, it's collateral damage, a price tag attached to a package that, overall, was worth buying. There's also a social signaling hypothesis, and this one is genuinely fascinating. Research from the 1990s and early 2000s suggests that humans, cross-culturally, associate baldness not with weakness, but with a specific type of maturity. Note that beards emerge in early adulthood as a signal of sexual maturity and reproductive fitness, aggressive, fertile, young. And pattern baldness emerges later, signaling a different stage of life entirely: social seniority, wisdom, non-threatening dominance. The kind of male that communities historically needed, experienced, influential, past the most volatile years of hormonal aggression. Some researchers argue pattern baldness essentially evolved as a visual badge of age and status, a biological equivalent of gray hair but more dramatic in its signaling. There are other hypotheses floating around, too. The vitamin D hypothesis, that in northern latitudes, losing scalp coverage would increase UV-exposed skin area and boost vitamin D synthesis. The parasite reduction theory. Less hair means fewer places for lice and ticks to hide. And the honest signal theory, that surviving and reproducing despite being bald is a paradoxical demonstration of underlying genetic quality, the evolutionary equivalent of a costly advertisement. The honest answer is probably that it's some combination of all of these, weighted differently in different populations, layered over a base of genetic drift in a world where baldness never hurt reproductive fitness enough to be strongly selected against. Our ancestors had children young. The average lifespan in the Pleistocene was short enough that most reproduction happened before any significant hair loss. The gene complex persisted because its costs, in evolutionary terms, were modest, and its benefits were real. And then, here's something researchers discovered that reframes the whole thing. Bald scalp, even long bald scalp, still contains hair follicle stem cells. The stem cells aren't gone. They're dormant, silenced. The stem cells are sitting there, still present, still alive, still theoretically capable of growing hair, but not receiving the activation signals they need, which means the follicle hasn't been destroyed, it's been turned off. This is now one of the most active areas of hair loss research in the world. If we could figure out exactly what signal is missing, what flips the stem cell from dormant to active, we might not need to block DHT at all. We might be able to simply wake up what's already there. Several research groups are working on exactly this. The science isn't there yet, but the direction is increasingly clear. We have finasteride, which blocks 5-alpha reductase and reduces DHT production. It works well, especially when started early, but requires lifelong use and carries side effects some men find unacceptable. We have minoxidil, which works through an entirely different mechanism. It extends the anagen phase and promotes blood flow to the follicle, and also works reasonably well, also requires lifelong use. And we have hair transplantation, which physically moves those resistant occipital follicles to where the susceptible ones used to be, exploiting the fact that the resistance is in the follicle, not the scalp. None of these is a cure, but the scientific understanding of what's actually happening, the DHT paradox, the miniaturization cascade, the sleeping stem cells, has advanced enormously in the past decade, and the pace is accelerating. Here's the thing I keep coming back to, thinking about all of this. Your hair is controlled by a hormone. That hormone is controlled by a gene. That gene is ancient, and it survived millions of years of evolution because it was tangled up with traits that mattered: strength, drive, reproductive success. Your baldness, if you have it or are developing it, is not a mistake. It's a trade-off written into the most fundamental code of who you are. An ancient deal your ancestors made without knowing they were making it. The universe gave you one remarkable package. And like all remarkable packages, it has some terms and conditions buried in the fine print. If questions like this, the strange, hidden logic woven into your own biology, are the reason you show up to the internet every day, then Briefly Science is exactly the right place for you. Subscribe. It takes literally 3 seconds, and it helps us make more of this. And drop a comment. Do you have hair loss in your family? Does knowing the science change how you feel about it? We genuinely want to know.